We got plenty to get to today, including some college realignment and a very bizarre story on the legal front in sports betting. So let's touch on those. But before we begin, rest in peace, Pete Rose passed away at the age of 83 years old yesterday. Pete Rose just recently had a documentary, and in addition, of course, has still been signing autographs like he always had in Las Vegas. Naturally, he is the hit king. Most hits in the history of Major League Baseball, but his career and his life tarnished by gambling back when he was a manager of the Cincinnati Reds. Needless to say, his lifetime ban in Major League Baseball and through the National Baseball Hall of Fame, does this end? Still remains to be seen. But Pete Rose, one of the greatest players in the history of the game, passes away at the age of 83 yesterday. Now, this is a bizarre story that just broke recently, and let's give credit to ESPN for breaking this story, that a former employee of the Jacksonville Jaguars who stole more than $22 million from their organization while he was working for them says that he is going to sue the Jaguars, saying that, sue FanDuel, excuse me, not the Jaguars. He is suing FanDuel in federal court on Tuesday, claiming that the sportsbook exploited his gambling addiction and also ignored responsible gaming and anti-money laundering protocols. So this is something we've never seen before. And let me break it down to you in layman's terms. Essentially, what this gentleman named Amit Patel is saying is that someone should have stopped him from his addiction and is suing the sportsbook who took his bets. Folks, I don't know what's going to end up happening here. I do not think he stands any chance of winning this lawsuit. But if you want to read more about it, folks, let's give credit to the people who broke it over at ESPN. Crazy story here. All right, let's move forward. Gonzaga is joining the Pac-12. It was just announced several minutes ago. Looks like they will be finally entering the conference they were rumored to enter. ESPN's Pete Thamel reporting this about 10, 15 minutes ago. As they head to the Pac-12, they join Utah State, Boise State, Fresno State, Colorado State, and San Diego State in recent weeks. If you remember, a few weeks ago, Gonzaga had said that they would not be joining the Pac-12, so an about face, and we have some crazy stories starting off with you this morning. Now let's get to the stories that everybody knows, because if you watch football, you probably watched the 2 Monday Night Football games last night. One of them was exciting, one of them was not. Let's start with the one that was exciting. That was the Detroit Lions. They end up beating the Seattle Seahawks 42-29 in this game. Jared Goff was absolutely perfect throwing the ball, 18 for 18. Also caught a touchdown pass from Amon-Ra St. Brown. Lions looked like they got things figured out. The Seahawks were undefeated, so they'll travel back home. I don't think they'll be too upset. After the game, Dan Campbell didn't seem to realize that Goff was perfect when he was throwing the ball.
Well, I just gave the game ball to somebody else, so I feel awful right now.
You got the safety, so.
Yeah. No, I knew he played a heck of a game. I did not realize he was perfect. I did not know he was literally 18 for 18. But I knew he played really well. You could feel it, and he really found his rhythm early. And I thought he was seeing the field, played with rhythm. He had to move a little bit in the pocket. I thought what really kickstarted him is he had to kind of move in the pocket, got spun around, and hung with J-Mo and hit him on the hook for the first down. It was big, man, because he was rolling after that. But just a number of huge throws, played with poise, got us in the right play. It was a heck of a play down in the red zone on the catch. Good throw by Saint. Been working that. So I just thought it was excellent. And credit to Ben Johnson too. I thought he called a heck of a game. It was a good game plan, and really everybody on that offense, stepped up and found a rhythm today.
Well, if that was an exciting game on Monday Night Football, I don't know what you would call this one. One of the worst games we've seen, maybe, on Monday Night Football in some years. Tennessee Titans, Miami Dolphins. Neither team had their starting quarterback for the majority of this game. Of course, Tua Tagovailoa on injured reserve. Snoop Huntley came in. He did not play well for Miami. Will Levis went out in this game. And Mason Rudolph came in and just basically was handing the ball off all game long. 31-12 was the final, and I understand there are 43 points in this game, but that's a bad beat going over the total. It was just a disgusting offensive game played from start to finish. And meanwhile, Miami, they can bring in any quarterback that they want. It feels like they can't get their offense going in any way, can't run the ball. Tyreek Hill did not look good in this game. And now a lot of questions surrounding what Miami may do going forward. Tagovailoa cannot come off injured reserve still for several weeks. So Mike McDaniel, the head coach of the Dolphins, basically says he's looking for any positives to build moving forward.
I thought the defense will probably have one play that they're not pumped about, but outside of that, I thought it was a step in the right direction. I think there was, some, and I thought Braxton had a chance to change the momentum of the game, and I think the game could have been a different ball game had we not had that early turnover on the lateral pass. So there was some stuff. I thought there was a couple plays here or there, but ultimately there's nothing good about this situation right now in terms of where our team needs to be, and we need to do enough to win a football game against any opponent. And right now, that's not the case. We have to fix that fast.
Yeah, Mike McDaniel did not seem overly optimistic, nor did he look up all that much in that press conference after the game, sorry to say. All right, Christian McCaffrey, folks, get this. He is going to go down in fantasy football history, possibly, as the only player ever to be taken number 1 overall in a fantasy football league and not play a single down in the NFL. I am not kidding. He went to Germany, has come back. The 49ers now say that not only does he have Achilles tendonitis in one leg, he's got it in another. Folks, we may not see him this year. Cooper Kupp for the Rams, not going to play this week also. Brandon McManus, you may remember the story. He is the former kicker in the NFL who was accused of allegedly sexually assaulting someone on a plane last year. NFL has found insufficient evidence to discipline him. So McManus can now kick again in the NFL. And also a fan got into it with Chase Brown, the running back on the Cincinnati Bengals. And the NFL is looking to this right now to see if they can figure out who the fan was and, certainly try and find a way to let this not ever happen again. In Major League Baseball, we do have the postseason beginning, but not before the New York Mets and Atlanta Braves played 2 games yesterday. The Mets won the first, the Braves won the second, so both teams are in, and the Diamondbacks are out. Chris Sale was scratched yesterday with back spasms, and it does not look like he is going to pitch for the Braves in San Diego in that wild card series. The National League wild card will kick off today. The Mets play the Brewers. The Braves play the Padres. The Brewers are minus 126 in game 1 of their 3-game series, and the Padres are minus 164 against Atlanta, basically because we have no clue who's going to start for the Atlanta Braves in that series there. Meanwhile, the American League wildcard series also begins later today. The Detroit Tigers will take on the Houston Astros. Tariq Skubal will pitch against Framber Valdez. Houston is a slight favorite at home. And also, the Kansas City Royals will travel to Baltimore to take on the Orioles in that 3-game series. The Orioles are the biggest favorite of the day today in Major League Baseball at minus 154 and also minus 172 to win that series. Pat Evans is with us from Legal Sports Report. We've got that big vote coming in Missouri to see if they legalize sports gambling there. Folks, this is now, I believe, like 1 month away from happening. So let's get to the very latest there. It's a story we're going to be covering intensely here on Newswire. Pat Evans is with us. And Pat, the teachers union now speaking out on the sports betting bill. I mean, look, this is gaining a lot of momentum on this. There's some negativity too. Let's not get it twisted. I see some articles about this and responsible gaming and, look what's happened in other places. But the more I'm sort of reading about this, the more it does seem to me that they're going to get the votes that they need.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a really interesting month. As you just mentioned, we're a month from Election Day, which is wild to think about that this year's flown by and we're there, basically. This is going to be a really close kind of issue to watch. We're seeing tons of people on both sides come out. Of course, FanDuel and DraftKings have funded $21.5 million, and I'm sure there's going to be more coming in to support this ballot initiative. And Caesars, of course, is kind of the lone operator on the other side funding the opposition PAC with the $4 million donation. And so this is just a really tight kind of contest at this point. Polling numbers show about 52% for, but of course, where are the margins of errors and what have you. And what this is interesting because the Kansas City Teachers Union came out and said they're against this amendment, which is really interesting because the campaign for this ballot amendment is called Winning for Missouri Education, which, they're funding education with the sports betting taxes, which is 10%. And they, there's a study that came out that within, 5 years, you'll get about $38.7 million in taxes or so for Missouri public education, which both gubernatorial candidates that are up for election in a month have come in and said, they're for this amendment because they want to help fund education, and that, they both think that, teacher wages need to go up in Missouri because I think it's about 47th for average teacher pay in the U.S. So, this is an issue that people are trying to push because they want to fund education, or that's what they're saying anyway. Well, the teachers union in Kansas City says, well, let's slow the roll here. You can't promise wages based on, fluctuating tax numbers, basically, is what they said. And there were a few other reasons they oppose it, but just a really kind of interesting take, because you've got teachers who would benefit from this, supposedly, or, and are saying, well, I don't know about this. We need to tread carefully. It'll be interesting to see what other teacher unions in Missouri, if there are other ones. I'm not quite sure. I'm not fully, up to date on the teacher unions in Missouri, but maybe I should be. See what they do. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch came out and said they're for the ballot initiative. So, you've got lots of supporters, not that many detractors yet. But, opposition campaigns can do wonders or terrible things to campaigns. So we'll see what happens to polling numbers. I'm sure there's going to be some soon. I saw the PAC, the opposition PAC has done some polling. I expect to see those numbers soon, and we'll see if they resemble the numbers that the Winning for Missouri Education has put out. So it's a big thing. We're a month away. Again, something I'm going to be watching very closely as others watch other things much more carefully on Election Day.
Yeah, it's sort of hard to believe, because if I'm a teacher in the state and I'm seeing my contingents not back this so I could make more money, I don't know how I would feel about that. So I got to say, I want to keep an eye on this story as we move forward and get closer to Election Day. It doesn't really add up to me. But all right, let's talk about sports advertising for sports wagering in Canada. We've seen a little bit of a drop-off here coming, and we know that there's more restrictions in Canada than there are in the U.S.
Yeah, so this is something I was watching just before coming on here, and then it wrapped up just in time, so I wasn't late for you, Craig. It would never be late for you, but, there's going to be another one tomorrow. Today was just kind of hearing witnesses. There were 2 hearings last week where they talked about it. Tomorrow's is going to be interesting because it's the commission that's going to kind of be tweaking it with amendments and considering clause by clause and probably voting it for or against to get out of the committee. So that'll be an interesting meeting tomorrow night. But yeah, Ontario has pretty strict, advertising rules. And that's been shown through fines. I mean, when it first launched in 2022, there were quite a few fines against operators, including, BetMGM and PointsBet and the like, for TV ads, ads at transit stations, billboards that, offered promotions or showed promotions. But in Ontario, you need to opt into ads. So you can't just get those promos out in the public. So that, that's one of them. They amended their laws or regulations to prohibit using athletes in advertising, except for responsible gaming ads.
Right.
So there's those things. But then the national parliament introduced a bill last year that this is the one they're talking about, to create a national framework for advertising, because a lot of people have been fed up with how many ads have come through. And it's a lot of the same things we've seen in Ontario, some of the same things we've seen here in Ohio and Illinois, prohibiting the use of free bets and, again, not using athletes, not advertising in places where kids or people under 21 are, things like that. And, there's a lot of pushback from the industry, of course, but they're also saying, we don't need a national framework. You just need a strong place like Ontario and the rest of the provinces will kind of be cascaded through that because operators aren't going to make different ads for different places. And then the other thing is you've seen a lot of witnesses say, listen, there was a huge amount of ads because it was a new industry, but it wasn't that many. It wasn't in the top 20 advertisers. It's starting to fall off. There's a broadcaster last week who was like, you know what, our channels are saying the demand for this time is already waning. We don't need to go too crazy on this. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. One thing I took away from it, which was funny, it makes you think, because yeah, of course we notice all the sports betting ads when we're watching games and whatever, but maybe take away how many advertisements there are for pickup trucks, and then a month later implement them and see if you've taken big notice of them and say, whoa, that's a lot of pickup ads, and see where it goes from there. So again, this is going to be an interesting meeting tomorrow where the parliamentarians are going to go clause by clause to check in to see what happens. Again, Canada's been a very interesting place for the advertising of sports betting. This framework, they say they want to kind of compare it or make it similar to what they have in tobacco advertising restrictions and regulations. So, which are very, very tight, and you don't see a ton of tobacco advertisements. So again, just a really interesting thing. We'll talk about this meeting or the clause by clause thing next week, I'm sure, when I'm on.
Yeah, a lot of tobacco ads in the 70s there, Pat, but we've gone away from that. Maybe in the 80s too, I think, a little bit, but not now. Okay, let's end with this would be great for the Carolina Panthers. Give fans something to root for, I guess. Retail sports betting and maybe coming to their stadium, I think, too, from what I saw. So regardless of results, at least you can ease the pain with some losing by betting on some other teams.
Yeah, I mean, it is an interesting thing. Last week, the Sports Betting Commission regulators approved the beginning of in-person sports betting in Carolina, which is kind of unique because in a lot of markets, we've seen in-person sports betting start before online sports betting, which North Carolina already has, or at least at the same time. So it's, we're almost a year out from when North Carolina got started, or I guess 6 months, or I forget exactly when it launched. But I mean, an in-person sports betting doesn't make up that big of a chunk of a handle. So it's really an interesting kind of time for this to roll out, but it'll be fun to see them anyway, because an in-person sports book is a good time.
It is. All right, Pat. Great stuff as always. Thanks for coming on Newswire. Always fun to talk to you about these topics. Thanks again.
Thanks, Craig.